Antony, the king of the south, made the first move in the civil war, as indeed the prophecy says. It says, at the time of the end, the king of the south will make a push against him. Started with the king of the south. And Antony, the king of the south, made the first move in the civil war. He sailed to Ephesus with Cleopatra and about 800 ships. 600 of them were Roman, about 200 of them were Egyptian. And from there, he marched to Athens with constantly increasing land forces. And for a while it was looking as though Antony was going to win the day. Josephus actually writes, when he's reading it, he's writing this in retrospect, when Caesar Augustus, that's Octavian, was informed of the celerity and magnificence of Antony's preparations, he was afraid of being forced into war that summer, and this would have been most inconvenient for him, for he was in want of almost everything. So at this stage, Antony, if he'd played his cards right, might have won the day. But before we get to the but, interestingly enough, Josephus also lists the auxiliary kings who fought under Antony's banner, including Bocchus of Africa, Polemo of Pontus, Malchus of Arabia, Herod of Judea. Herod had backed Antony. He thought Antony was going to win. And it didn't look like, it looked like that was a pretty good bet at that time, and he supported Antony. And thus, in accordance with Daniel 11 verse 40, we could say that a king of the south was the first to make a push in this war, and he did so with the backing of Herod, the king of the Jews, and the king of verses 36 to 39 of Daniel. But strangely, although Antony's foot soldiers outnumbered those of Augustus, and although his commanders urged him to bring the matter to a head in a land battle, the historian Plutarch comments as follows: "Such a slave was he to the will of a woman, Cleopatra, that to gratify her, though much superior on land, he put his whole confidence in the navy, notwithstanding that the ships had not half their complement of men." Now, I don't understand what was going on here, but apparently Cleopatra, I don't know, wanted to win it in the navy battle, and he should have gone ahead with the land forces because he outnumbered Octavian. He could have done it, but he went ahead with the sea battle. And then on 2nd of September, 31 BC, Antony's fleet was soundly beaten by Octavian in the famous Battle of Actium, just off the coast of Greece. Now, that's such a famous battle. If you go into places like the Louvre and whatever, you'll find paintings of it and all this. An amazing battle, and it had a huge outcome on how the Roman Empire developed. Antony was defeated, and as a result of that, thus did a king of the north, you could say, come upon a king of the south with a great fleet of ships, to use the words of Daniel 11 verse 40. So far so good. But it didn't end there. After the disaster at Actium, Antony's infantry deserted him. Now, I'm not going to back a loser. Antony flees back across the Mediterranean to Egypt to make his last stand with Cleopatra. Oh, great romantic stuff, isn't it, you know? And Octavian pursues him by land and sea. You never let your enemy get away. Octavian pursues him across the Mediterranean and also down through Judea. And that's exactly what happened. He, Octavian, the king of the north, invaded many countries and swept through them like a flood. He's got the smell of victory in his nostrils, and he's going to knock out Antony for good. Daniel 11 verse 40 says the king of the north, invades many countries, sweeps through them like a flood. And he did. Cilicia, Paphlagonia, Thrace, Pontus, Galatia, Illyria, Armenia, North Africa, to name just a few. He also invaded the beautiful land, as it says in chapter 11 verse 41. Because, Josephus writes, Caesar went for Egypt through Syria, when Herod received him with royal and rich entertainment. Hey, this is the same Herod, by the way, who a little while before was backing Antony. He's changed horses, and he gets away with it. Maybe because it just suited Octavian, maybe. I mean, he doesn't want a war on the way with the... If Herod's there ready to lick his boots, he might as well play along with it. I suppose he doesn't want a needless war with Herod or something. He doesn't want that. Herod's all for me now, that's fine. He's a weakling, says Octavian. Caesar goes through Egypt, through Syria, comes down. Herod receives him with rich and royal entertainments. And then did he first of all ride along with Caesar as he was reviewing his army about Ptolemy, and feasted with all his friends, and then distributed among the rest of his army what was necessary to feast them withal. That's what it says. He, king of the north, will also invade the beautiful land. Many countries will fall. And this he we're talking about then is Octavian, who became Caesar Augustus, who was, again, a huge historical figure. Huge. And why wouldn't Caesar Augustus be in the prophecy somewhere? He invaded the beautiful land. Many countries will fall, but Edom, Moab, and the leaders of Ammon will be delivered from his hand. What do we make of this? Well, Octavian did actually send an expedition into these countries under one of his commanders, Aelius Gallus, in which he was joined by 500 of Herod's crack palace guards. But history records that, and I think this is from Josephus, the bad success that attended Aelius in this expedition, for whatever reason I'm not sure, deterred both him and others from further attempts. So I imagine, Octavian gets down there, he's keen to get to Egypt, he's keen. Herod's there saying, oh, you wonderful man, you're fantastic. Can't we just perhaps, I don't know, knock off these nasty little people on the side here, Edom, Moab? Okay, we'll send a few troops in there, knock them off in a couple of days. Had difficulty doing it, got out of it, said not going there again. Wasn't important to Augustus. Wasn't important, and they didn't try it again. So Edom, Moab, and the leaders of Ammon were indeed delivered from the hand of the king of the north. He will extend his power over many countries. Egypt will not escape. He will gain control of the treasures of Egypt. Now, when we try to put all this into a 20th century, 21st century context, as I said, we have treasures of Egypt. Oh, it's got to be the Suez Canal. Oh, doesn't cut it, in my view. Well, in those days, the treasures of Egypt were of fabulous value. Indeed, they probably were right up to the time of Napoleon. Napoleon actually went over there and sort of took all the stuff back and took it back to the Louvre. That's what happened. And there's marvellous stuff. But certainly in the days of the Romans, the treasures of Egypt were of fabulous value, not like the squalid and poverty-stricken Egypt of our day. So it makes more sense to apply this in that first century context. And thus it was in 30 BC that Julius Caesar's adopted son Octavian drove Antony and Cleopatra to commit suicide, murdered her infant son by Antony, Ptolemy the 15th, Caesarion. I think that's where we get the old Caesarian section from too, I believe. Ptolemy the 15th, Caesarion, annexed the country and gained total control of the treasures of ancient Egypt. Octavian now has total control of the Roman Republic. And that was the end of the Ptolemies. It was also the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. This was the moment when Rome ceased to become the world's policeman and became the world's imperial power, because in the face of his massive accomplishments, the Senate in Rome declared Octavian the rightful successor of Julius Caesar, and he henceforth became Caesar Augustus. And he was the one who was the Caesar there at the birth of Jesus, at the time of the birth of Jesus. But the prophecy goes on to say, but reports or tidings from the east and the north will alarm him. Now, you see, this is where we've got to change the pronouns again. Because this will only make sense in the context of what I'm saying tonight if the him now becomes the king in the middle. Verses 36 to 39. And I know you're going to say that. But what I'm going to say, Elle says I can't do that. It's too convenient, isn't it? I've got to make sense of this. I've got to make sense of it. And there's nothing grammatically to stop me taking this view. All right? Look, bear in mind, the Daniel that we've got in our English Bible is taken from the Hebrew and it's been through translation, whatever. We don't understand it, but let me just run with this, please. Let me just run. Reports or tidings from the east and the north will alarm the king in the middle. And the king in the middle, Herod, will set out in a great rage to destroy and annihilate many. What do you think that might mean? Tidings from the east will alarm him. The identity, as I say, of the he in this passage is not apparent at first instance, but there's nothing in the original text, I've just said that indicates the pronouns have to refer to the one identity throughout. This could be a reference back to the king of verses 36 to 39, Herod, in which case, tidings from the east, oh, come on people, the Magi, looking for the one born king of the Jews, reports from the east will alarm him. What about the north? Well, first of all, before we get there, and that set Herod off in the insane rage, of course, that resulted in the annihilation of the baby boys of Bethlehem. Tidings from the north. Could be news from Rome, from his oldest son Antipater, whom he didn't like, and who was a despicable character in his own right, that Herod's other two sons, whom Herod had planned to succeed him, had slandered their father in Caesar's presence. And when you're a narcissist like Caesar, and so concerned about pleasing whoever's in Rome, you can't tolerate that. What does he have to do? He has to kill them. And he had them killed. He broke forth in intense fury and took revenge against his two previous sons. He'd already killed another one and their supporters, thus throwing all his succession plans into disarray. Herod is by now an old man. He doesn't have long to go. He'd spent his whole lifetime building up this dynasty that was going to last for, 1,000 years. And he's got all these wonderful sons. And he's killing them off left, right and centre because he can't trust them and they're slandering him into Caesar. And he's still worried that he might be killed himself, and it was a dreadful, dreadful life Herod had got himself into. Tidings from the east, there's a Messiah on the loose. Tidings from the north, from Rome, your sons are bad-mouthing you. And he set out in a great rage to destroy and annihilate many. Herod the Great. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas at the beautiful holy mountain, yet he will come to his end and no one will help him. Well, as far as the royal tents, Herod had two magnificent palaces in Jerusalem. One in the temple area, the other in the upper city at the beautiful holy mountain, between the seas, between the Mediterranean Sea and the Dead Sea. Herod was good at palaces. He was good at palaces, good at architecture, good at all that stuff. What more can I say? It fits. And yet he will come to his end and no one will help him. And when you read the history books about the end of Herod, it was a dreadful end. In the last few days he went to another palace at Jericho, I think it was. And according to Josephus, in his old age, Herod was struck with a painful and loathsome disease, and suffering alike from that and from the pangs of guilty fear, yet continued in a course of extreme wickedness to his last hour, seeking no remedy for his evil passions, but exhausting all the resources of the physician's skill to mitigate his bodily distemper and lengthen out his wretched life. And it's apparently, as part of this, I'm told, well, the history books say, that in the last the last week or two of his life, he actually was so concerned that people wouldn't mourn his death that he ordered that 45 of the leading citizens of the day be arrested, rounded up, whatever, and they be killed upon his death, so that at least the nation would be in a mourning mood. They would mourn for the leaders who would be killed. It's a bit like saying, I want to round up all the cabinet in Canberra, the whole lot. They're all to be killed when I die, because otherwise you might be happy, and I don't want that. Herod was a huge character, and if we just try and keep him out of prophecy altogether, it does seem to me to be a bit strange. And in including him in prophecy like this, we're including people like Augustus, who was again huge. The amazing man Augustus in many ways, and he was wicked too, but he was one of the great, truly great Caesars. And then after Augustus came, of course, there was the dynasty. There was Tiberius, and was it Caligula, and then Claudius and Nero, and all and so it went on, as they had their kings or their Caesars as well.